13-year-old Aarushi Talwar was, by almost all accounts, a lively star student at her Delhi public school. As the daughter of two well-known Delhi dentists, Rajesh and Nupur Talwar, Aarushi was looking forward to a life of privilege and high expectations ahead of her. Her parents had met in a Delhi medical school, both pursuing a career in dentistry, before getting married in 1989 despite being from different ethnic groups. In the years after their marriage, they both completed their postgraduate degrees and eventually had Aarushi, their first and only daughter, on May 24, 1994. However, her parents, already juggling their dentistry careers and opening dental clinics in their name, decided to move from Delhi to the nearby suburb of Noida, and after living with various relatives for a while, the family finally bought an apartment for themselves, the address of which would be cemented into the minds of the locals in the following years. This 1,300-square-foot apartment, soon to become crime scene, consisted of 3 bedrooms, one for Rajesh and Nupur Talwar, one for Aarushi, and one for the family's live-in servant or domestic help, Hemraj. The day preceding the murder was like any other. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar would usually spend the better part of their day working at their own clinics. One was in Haus Khas and the other in Sector 27 of Noida. They would typically work alongside another dentist couple, Anita and Praful Durrani, who the Talwars grew very close to over time. On the day of the murders, Rajesh Talwar, the father of Aarushi, had been teaching at a dental college near Delhi. Nupur Talwar, the mother of Aarushi, had worked at her Haus Khas clinic from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. By the end of the day, at around 7:30 p.m., Nupur returned home after her shift. Around 2 hours later, Rajesh would be driven back to the apartment by Umesh Sharma, a driver the Talwars had previously employed. On the day of the murders, Umesh had driven Rajesh back to the apartment at around 9:30 p.m., but because the Talwars didn't have a garage, Umesh had to park the car somewhere else, which in this case was the house of Nupur's parents. So, after dropping Rajesh off, Umesh parked the car, walked back to the apartment, and handed the keys and other work-related bags to Hemraj, the domestic servant of the family. Umesh, now at the front door of the apartment, saw Nupur and Aarushi near the dining table and Rajesh coming out of his bedroom. This would be the last time anyone outside of the family would see Aarushi and Hemraj alive. Because no outsiders had been in the apartment during the murder, the following sequence of events is purely based on what the survivors of the night have told us in the CBI closure report filed in 2010. This report has been heavily criticized since its release, so take the following with a grain of salt. After Umesh had left the apartment at around 10 p.m., the Talwars had eaten dinner as a family, then retired to their respective rooms as they would on a normal day. At the time, Aarushi's 14th birthday was only a few days away, and her parents had decided to give her an early birthday present. So, just before 10 p.m., Rajesh and Nupur gifted Aarushi a Sony 10-megapixel camera, knowing that she was an avid photographer and model for her friends at school. Her friend group, who she called the Awesome Foursome, would do almost everything together, including sleepovers, attending dance classes, and working on school assignments. Nevertheless, after having received the camera, and according to most sources, Aarushi took at least 23 pictures that night, 18 of which have been deleted for unknown reasons. Some say this was just Aarushi deleting pictures she didn't like, but others see it as a sign of third-party involvement. But that's something we'll get to later. The last picture that night is widely believed to have been taken at 10:10 p.m., at which point Aarushi's parents had returned to their room and were getting ready for bed. Less than 1 hour later, at 11 p.m., Rajesh, wanting to use the internet for the rest of the night, asked Nupur to turn on the internet router, which was in Aarushi's room. According to her, when she walked in, Aarushi was awake reading the book The 3 Mistakes of My Life. Nupur turned on the router, returned to her room, and went to bed. This would, according to them, be the last time Aarushi's parents would see her alive. However, this part of the story is somewhat unclear. The lock on Aarushi's door was self-locking, much like one you'd see at a hotel. So, once the door is closed, it can be opened from the inside without a key but can't be opened from the outside without one. Nupur Talwar has stated multiple times that after leaving Aarushi's room that night, she's not sure whether she locked or even closed Aarushi's door, as she was tired and eager to get back to bed. She has said that if she did lock Aarushi's door, she might have left the keys hanging in their slot.
The only way I could put this across is that when I was almost dropping off to sleep and Rajesh told me to go and put on the router in the next room, I kind of woke up and I did go into Aarushi's room and she was and I put on the router and I said, okay, Aarushi, good night, now you go to sleep. And I pulled back the door and I walked out. Probably the biggest mistake of my life.
Nevertheless, Nupur returned to her room and went to bed, leaving Rajesh on his laptop. According to various sources, Rajesh spent the night sending emails and surfing dentistry and stock market websites. At 11:37 p.m., Rajesh sent an email to this address. A few minutes later, at 11:41, the laptop showed its last internet usage, but again, this is where things start to get confusing. Despite the laptop's last internet usage being 11:41 p.m., the router's last internet connection was made at 12:08 a.m., around 30 minutes later. Further investigation into the router's internet logs shows that it had been turned on and off sporadically in the middle of the night and even into the morning. So, the router's internet logs were deemed unreliable, and it's widely accepted that Rajesh had turned off his computer and went to sleep at around midnight that night. There is no concrete evidence of what happened between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. that night, when the murder is believed to have taken place. Circumstantial evidence has been used to create a potential sequence of events, but that's something we'll get into later. For now, let's skip to the morning after the murder. Nupur Talwar was awoken at around 6 a.m. to the sound of the doorbell ringing. The family's housekeeper, Bharti Mandal, would usually come by at the start of the day before moving on to other houses. But despite the usual routine, Nupur noticed something was off. The family's domestic help, Hemraj, would usually open the door for Bharti, but the fact that Bharti had been standing out at the front door for a few minutes indicated that Hemraj wasn't in the house. Confused, Nupur tried calling him, but the call was abruptly cut after 2 seconds, and after trying again, it seemed as though his phone had been switched off. Now even more confused, Nupur went to help their housemaid Bharti, who was still at the front door. Now the apartment entrance consisted of 3 doors, 2 metal doors and 1 wooden one. In initial witness statements, Bharti Mandal had said that she found the front door latched from the outside, which means she could easily unlatch and open the door. This would imply that any outsider could open the front door to the apartment without a key. But later, authorities theorized that the door had actually been unlatched from the inside and Nupur had unlatched it for Bharti by going through Hemraj's room. The state of the doors that morning have been heavily debated, but the most agreed upon sequence of events is that when Bharti first arrived at the apartment, she tried pushing the outermost door open but couldn't. After ringing the doorbell several times, Nupur had agreed to give her the keys to the doors. So, Bharti was told to go outside and catch the keys that Nupur would throw from the second-floor balcony. But, after walking back to the apartment, Bharti tried pushing the outermost door again, and it opened without a key. At which point, she used the keys to open the middle door and had the final wooden door opened for her by Nupur. In any case, Bharti eventually entered the apartment and found Nupur and Rajesh, quote, weeping after finding their daughter lying in a pool of blood in her own bed. A post-mortem analysis later indicated that she'd been hit with a heavy blunt weapon after having her throat cut with a small but sharp blade. Using the semi-digested food found in her stomach after the post-mortem, her time of death was believed to be around midnight to 1 a.m. Frightened, Bharti went to inform the neighbors about the situation before leaving to continue working in other houses. Nupur, who later said she was in a state of shock, called her parents, the Duranis, and her sister-in-law, Dinesh Talwar. At this point, 1 or 2 neighbors had already come to the apartment to see what had happened, followed by Nupur's parents, then other friends and family. By the time the police arrived at around 6:50 a.m., there were more than 20 people in the apartment. It was later said that the crime scene had been, quote, completely trampled upon, estimating that at least 90% of the evidence had been destroyed before police arrived. Despite this, police started searching the apartment for any hint as to what happened the previous night, and quickly realized that they had very little to go off of. They found no sign of forced entry, no theft of property reported, and no murder weapons found in the apartment. However, upon initial examination of Aarushi's body, they were able to draw some conclusions. They found that Aarushi's room had been heavily dressed, meaning the perpetrator had tried to cover their tracks. Looking at pictures of the crime scene, police noted that Aarushi's body lay undisturbed, and her blanket had been pulled over her, positioned in a way as if she was still sleeping despite the violent use of force. But Aarushi's room wasn't the only place in the apartment where blood was visible. Upon walking into the kitchen, police noticed a bottle of Ballantine's Scotch whiskey on the dining table, covered in bloody fingerprints. The fingerprints were never identified, but this piece of evidence implied two things. One, the apartment had a concealed minibar behind a wooden panel in the kitchen, and the presence of a Scotch whiskey bottle would imply that the perpetrator knew where this minibar was located, meaning that they knew the house well. Second, the presence of a Scotch whiskey bottle with blood on it would imply that after committing the murder, the perpetrator had enough time to stay in the house, seemingly without the fear of being caught. Although, one of the most revealing discoveries in the initial investigation by police was the bloodstains found on the stairs leading up to the locked roof terrace door. Police actually weren't the first people to spot this. Friends of the Talwars who were there at the time had brought this to the authorities' attention, and after failing to find the key to the door, police dismissed it, theorizing that this might have been used as an escape route for the perpetrator, and so the door remained closed. Nupur Talwar, knowing that Hemraj was still missing and wouldn't answer his phone, assumed that he killed Aarushi and fled the apartment. So, while police searched the crime scene, the Talwars urged them to, quote, instead of wasting time at the flat, search for Hemraj. The parents later denied ever saying
this. The CBI
this.
then goes to say, when the police and the investigating officer wanted to go up, Dr. Rajesh Talwar insisted that the police, instead of wasting time in the flat, should search for Hemraj.
Again, completely false statement. After I saw Hemraj, after I saw Aarushi, I don't even remember what happened to me. For the next few hours, I was completely blanked out. And there was, there would be so many policemen in the house, and nobody was asked not to go anywhere. Nobody told them what to do. We didn't tell them what to do and what not to do. All we were saying was Hemraj is missing.
By 8 a.m., 2 hours after the discovery of Aarushi's body, hundreds of reporters had gathered around the apartment, attracted to the story of a murder in an affluent suburban neighborhood. They were told by police that Hemraj was the prime suspect, and the initial theory was that Hemraj had drunkenly walked into Aarushi's room the previous night, attempted to assault her, and when she resisted, he murdered her and fled. This theory was circulated throughout the media for a full day after the murder, and a 20,000 rupee reward had been placed for any tips leading to his capture.
Our top story, the murder of a teenager in a Delhi suburb. Aarushi Talwar's body was found with stab and head injuries at her Noida home this morning at a room right next to where her parents slept.
Coming up.
The main suspect in the case is a domestic help, a Nepalese man who's gone missing.
At this point, police firmly believed that this was an open and shut case and focused their resources on the search for Hemraj until the following day. On May 17th, only one day after the discovery of the murder, a retired police officer, K.K. Gautam, arrived at the Talwar's house to offer his condolences. While there, he decided to investigate the crime scene himself, and after discovering the aforementioned bloodstains leading up to the locked roof terrace door, he requested the key, just as the authorities had done the day before. After failing to retrieve the key, Gautam, with the help of some local police officers he'd called, had broken the lock to the door. And upon opening, they found this. Bloodstains on the ground had indicated that someone had been dragged across the terrace. Upon following these bloodstains, they discovered the body of Hemraj in a state of putrefaction placed near the external unit of the air conditioner. Witnesses who were there at the time say that Hemraj's body was covered with this cooler panel in an attempt to dress the crime scene just as the perpetrator had done for Aarushi. Later, a post-mortem analysis indicated that Hemraj had also been hit with the heavy blunt weapon before his throat was also cut with a small blade. It also confirmed that the estimated time of death was the same time as Aarushi's, so it's safe to assume that the person who murdered Aarushi had also murdered Hemraj. But the body of Hemraj wasn't the only clue on the terrace. As more people and reporters started arriving at the apartment, people had noticed a bloody handprint near the door. They later confirmed it to be the blood of Hemraj, but because the handprint was smudged and the crime scene wasn't closed off from the public, police couldn't lift any fingerprints. This was an oversight that would be heavily criticized by the public. In fact, it's around this time that the public started questioning the police's ability to carry out the investigation. After all, they hadn't closed off the apartment nor the terrace to the public, and crucial pieces of evidence had been destroyed as a result of this. Articles published just days after the murder referred to the Noida police as discredited and criticized their choices. which is why on May 21st, 5 days after the murder, the Delhi police force joined the investigation, hoping to lead it in the right direction. But as you'll soon find out, it only gets worse from here. Now the Talwars, being a fairly suburban and western family, had given both Aarushi and Hemraj a phone for their own use. Aarushi was given a Nokia, using it to text and call her friends from school, while Hemraj was given a Tata Indicom mobile phone, typically using it for work purposes. Police hoped that if they could find either of these phones, it could give them insight into what happened that night. The only problem was that both phones were reported missing the morning after the murder. But after successfully obtaining the phone records of both Aarushi and Hemraj, the police were left with more questions than answers. Hemraj, as we previously mentioned, typically used his phone for work. The day of the murder, most of his calls were to and from the Talwar's clinic. But curiously, the last call on Hemraj's phone was an incoming call from a PCO, basically a payphone. The call started at 8:27 p.m. and lasted around 6 minutes. Police to this day haven't been able to track down who made the call or what was talked about, but because there's no evidence that this call had anything to do with the murder, it's usually only mentioned in passing. Aarushi's phone records, however, contained much more information. Aarushi would usually use her phone to text friends from school. Among them was a boy named Anmol Agarwal. He'd been Aarushi's boyfriend for about a month prior to the murders, before the two broke up for unknown reasons. Police had found out that the two had connected at least 688 times in the month prior to the murders, and theorized that Anmol had to know at least something about what happened. So, on May 22nd, a week after the murders, Anmol was brought in for interrogation. Now Anmol claimed that on the night of the murder, Aarushi had told him about an affair that her father was having. According to him, he'd been told that Rajesh Talwar was having an affair with his fellow colleague Anita Durrani, and Aarushi had despised him for it. Police, now having finally found something to grab onto, decided to schedule a now infamous press conference the next day, one that would be criticized endlessly in the following years. In the years to come, the following clip in particular would be shown countless times to summarize the police's lack of interest in the case.
16 तारीख में सुबह पुलिस को खबर दी गई कि श्रुति का कत्ल हुआ है। Yes, please.
But, apart from the police's apparent lack of professionalism, they did put forward a sequence of events. Having been told that Aarushi knew about her father's supposed affair, they echoed that to the media.
डॉक्टर के एक्स्ट्रा मैरिटल अफेयर की जानकारी लड़की को भी थी, नौकर को भी थी। इसलिए आगे बात तो सुने मेरी, आगे मेरी बात नहीं सुनेंगे तो फिर कैसे पता चलेगा। इस बात की चर्चा हेमराज और आरुषि आपस में करते थे। इस चर्चा के दौरान उनकी घनिष्ठता हो गई और वो एक दूसरे के नजदीक आ गए। इसको डॉक्टर राजेश बिल्कुल बर्दाश्त।
They went on to say that because Hemraj and Aarushi both knew about her father's affair, they grew closer to each other, something that her father did not approve of.
उस समय उन्होंने कुछ ऑब्जेक्शनेबल हालत में, ऑब्जेक्शनेबल हालत का मतलब ये नहीं कि वो कंप्रोमाइजिंग पोजीशन में ही थे, लेकिन उन्होंने ऐसी हालत में देखा।
On May 15th, he says, Rajesh found the two of them in a quote, objectionable though not compromising position. At which point, Rajesh took Hemraj up to the terrace, under the false pretext that they were just going to talk, and once they'd arrived, Rajesh had killed Hemraj. After hiding his body behind a wooden panel, Rajesh then went back to the apartment to drink some whiskey, before murdering Aarushi as well. On the same day, Rajesh Talwar was arrested on camera for the double murder of his daughter and his servant.
दिनेश अरुण मुझे बचाइए आप, मैंने कुछ नहीं करा है, अपनी बेटी का कत्ल किया है, अब मेरे को बचाओ। दिनेश जी, they are raping me, यार, holding like this। नहीं, डॉक्टर कुछ कहना चाहते हैं? चलो हेलो।
Over the few days leading up to the arrest of Rajesh Talwar, the police and media had somewhat turned against the parents, and had questioned some inconsistencies in the parents' story. First off, media had long questioned how the murder of Aarushi could have taken place without the parents hearing anything. Apart from the parents' claim that 2 air conditioners were turned on that night, the distance between the rooms are around 7 to 8 feet, and the wall separating the 2 rooms is usually referred to as a quote, plywood partition, implying that sound could have easily traveled through it. However, the Talwars say that the wall was actually made of brick, just with plywood lamination over it.
The separation between your room and Arushi's room was through a plywood partition. How is it that if somebody came in from the outside, you all heard nothing?
Let me again clarify that point. Anybody and everybody can go and see that house. That is not a plywood partition. It's a wall with a wooden laminate and a wooden door. That's what it is. It's not a plywood partition. That's a completely wrong statement.
Either way, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to assume that the parents would have heard something from Arushi's room, whether it be a scream or the sound of a weapon. Second, one aspect that the initial team of investigators questioned was that there was no sign of forced entry. This means that either one of the parents had committed the murders, or somebody had to have let the perpetrator in. The lack of forced entry puts the parents of Aarushi in an awkward position to explain themselves. Among other things, the suspicion and eventual arrest of the father of Aarushi had made him one of the most hated men in the media. Any Google search mentioning his name at the time showed news reports that echoed what the police had said, that Rajesh Talwar was the definitive murderer of his own daughter and his servant. But Nupur Talwar, the mother of Aarushi, had avoided arrest and up to this point had avoided the spotlight. Only one day after her husband was arrested, she'd done an interview with NDTV.
Both his daughter and Hemraj. But there is one person who hasn't spoken yet, one of the 4 who is here to tell her story, and she joins us today. That's Dr. Nupur Talwar, Aarushi's mother, and Dr. Rajesh Talwar's wife.
I lost Aarushi 8 days ago in such a brutal way, and I know with all conviction, 100%, Rajesh doted on his daughter. It couldn't be the way that they're suggesting this.
Some say that in this moment, Nupur Talwar is trying to force herself to cry or is too unemotional. In fact, both Nupur and Rajesh Talwar would later be criticized for their lack of emotion on camera. This prompted the interviewer, Sonia Singh, to publish a column a few years later, setting the record straight. But by this point, the media was in full swing, creating various extravagant theories with little to no evidence to back them up. Most of these were about Aarushi, and since the police investigating the case weren't typically raised in liberal suburban households, they seemed to question Aarushi's behavior, labeling things like having sleepovers, texting boys, and using social media as suspicious. So, it was up to the Talwars to defend Aarushi and themselves amidst these allegations. First, they addressed why they hadn't heard anything from Aarushi's room that night. They told authorities that 2 air conditioners had been switched on, their door was locked, and Aarushi was suspected to have a throat infection, meaning she couldn't scream loudly. Later, authorities ran a simulation experiment, recreating the noise of the air conditioners and seeing if the Talwars were telling the truth.
At the real crime time basis, we switched on the AC of Dr. Talwar's bedroom and Aarushi's bedroom. The room was locked, and the experts found that no sound either of the step or opening of the door was heard even by the person who were away.
Second, the Talwars addressed the theory that her father had found Aarushi and Hemraj in an objectionable position, leading them to murder both of them. The Talwars from the very start have denied this theory, citing the lack of blood on either of their pajamas the morning after the murder, and their claim that no parent could kill their own child.
Had any inkling or any suspicion that your husband had killed Aarushi, would you cover up as a mother?
Would any mother do that? Would any mother sleep there through the night knowing that her husband has killed the child?
In response to the theory that Rajesh Talwar and Anita Durrani were having an affair, both of the accused have expressly denied it, claiming that the Durranis were like an extended family. Some have said that it's suspicious how much the Talwars, on the first day of the investigation, had urged police to go search for Hemraj instead of investigating the flat. Maybe they were hiding something from authorities or trying to lead them towards a dead end. Despite having denied ever saying this in the first place, the Talwars had also claimed that they were just using their common sense.
Actions you would have. Here you have a situation
the daughter is dead, you see the servant missing, what are you going to say?
As the case became more and more complex, and news and media outlets called into question the corruption of the Noida and Uttar Pradesh police, it was time for a new and bigger team to take over, hopefully to dispel any false theories and bring to light the facts of what happened that night. On May 31st, 2008, around half a month after the murders, the Central Bureau of Investigation, or CBI, took charge of the case. Wanting to start from the ground up, now with more time and resources, the CBI went to the Talwar's apartment to try and investigate properly this time, and one of the first things they discovered was the suspicious state of Hemraj's room. It seemed as if there was more than one person in his room on the night of the murders. They found beer, Sprite, and whiskey bottles with various cups laid out, as if Hemraj had invited people over for drinks. Later, a retired police officer, the same one who had opened the terrace door for the first time, supposedly told the CBI that the toilet had been used by multiple people, and that depressions on Hemraj's bed suggested that 3 to 4 people had been there. He later denied ever saying this, but with this new lead, the CBI decided to detain one of Hemraj's friends. This was someone they thought could have been invited over that night, the Talwar's work assistant, Krishna Tadarai. Krishna, like Hemraj, was Nepali. He also had worked for the Talwars and lived in the same apartment complex, so the CBI theorized that it's likely the two were good friends, and if Krishna was in the apartment that night, he had to have known something. But it was around this time when the CBI found one important fact about Krishna. In the days before the murder, Krishna had been scolded by Rajesh Talwar for making a dental cast incorrectly at their clinic, and it's thought that Krishna wanted to get revenge. Days after being detained, Krishna was subjected to a polygraph test, the results of which were seemingly inconclusive. So on June 12th, just less than a month after the murders, Krishna was subjected to a so-called narcoanalysis test, meaning he'd be put into a trance-like state where he would hopefully give the police a lead. In 2015, footage of the test was leaked on YouTube.
कृष्णा थोड़ा राय नेपाल का
और हेमराज का दोस्त और कौन कौन आते थे उस घर को?
में एक राजकुमार आता था, हाँ। जो डॉक्टर दुरानी का काम करता है, और एक नीचे से एक राजू नाम का लड़का था, वो आता था, एक ही आता, मैं आता था बस। मैं आता था बाई चांस, कभी कभार आता था मैं, वो तो नहीं तो नहीं आता था, तो फोन में बात हो जाती थी।
और हेमराज के घर में और कौन है? हेमराज का दोस्त और कौन कौन है दिल्ली पे?
हेमराज का एक मैं हूँ, एक राजकुमार है।
राजकुमार का धंधा क्या है?
राजकुमार का, हाँ। राजकुमार का मैंने उससे कभी खुल के बात नहीं किया है, कभी भी दिल से बात नहीं किया है, पर देखा जाए तो वो ठीक हो नहीं हो खुदा बताता है। उसको मैंने 1-2 बार हेमराज के साथ ही देखा है, 25 में देखा।
In the following weeks, Rajkumar would be arrested.
हेमराज को किसने मारा? राजकुमार ने ही मारा क्या? हाँ? राजकुमार ने मारा क्या?
हो सकता है मैम, राजकुमार हो या आस पड़ोस का हो।
क्या?
या आस पड़ोस का हो।
क्या?
आस पड़ोस हो।
क्या? कौन?
आसपास का कोई हो।
आसपास कौन है रे? नेपाली लोग है क्या आसपास?
नहीं।
तुमने देखा ना कौन था राजकुमार के साथ? राजकुमार के साथ और कौन था?
राजकुमार के साथ था।
हाँ, कौन?
हिंदू लड़का।
कौन था? क्या नाम था उसका?
शंभू। शंभू।
Shambhu, later revealed to be the nickname of Vijay Mandal, another servant in the area, was also arrested in the following weeks. These interrogations were never made public, but according to various semi-reliable media sources, it went something like this. The night of the murders, Hemraj had invited Krishna, Mandal, and Rajkumar to the Talwar's apartment while everyone was asleep. Once they'd arrived, the four had started drinking alcohol, and Krishna might have expressed his desire to take revenge against Rajesh for scolding him the day before. But this is where the story starts to branch off. At one point, Krishna had said that after entering Aarushi's room, Rajkumar had tried to assault her, and when she resisted, Krishna had pulled out a kukri, a type of Nepali knife, and killed Aarushi. Hemraj, being a witness, was taken up to the terrace and killed as well. Another version of Krishna's story later surfaced, explaining that Rajkumar and Mandal had tried to assault Aarushi, and when she resisted, they'd killed her with a kukri. The knife was then cleaned with a tissue paper and flushed down Aarushi's toilet. The three men then took Hemraj up to the terrace and killed him for being a witness. A third Krishna story explained that Rajkumar had walked into Aarushi's room and tried to assault her. When she resisted, Krishna had killed her. Later, Hemraj had threatened to tell the Talwars about the incident, at which point he was taken up to the terrace and killed by the other three. This theory also suggests that the three men had tried to go into the Talwar's room but found it locked. A fourth theory, explained by Rajkumar under narco tests, explained that Aarushi had threatened to tell her father that Krishna had been complaining about him to the other servants, forcing Krishna to kill her with a kukri. After Hemraj threatened to expose them, they took him to the terrace where they killed him as well. A fifth and final theory circulated in the media was given at a press conference on July 11, 2008, when Arun Kumar, the director of the CBI team at the time, said this.
He said that Hemraj had called and they had gathered in the room of Hemraj late in night. Krishna came first. He consumed alcohol. Then Vijay Mandal came and Rajkumar came. They consumed alcohol and discussed about Aarushi, and they entered in the room of Aarushi. She got up and tried to scream. She was gagged and she was first hit by a hard blunt object. There where they probably tried to sexually abuse, and that led to a scuffle. And after that scuffle they went to the terrace, and on the terrace Hemraj was killed. They locked the terrace, came down in the room of Aarushi, and then slit her after that.
So, as the public and the CBI began focusing more and more on the three servants, the CBI eventually released Rajesh Talwar on July 11th, as there was no hard evidence that he'd committed any crime. So, attention shifted towards Krishna, Mandal and Rajkumar, as they'd basically confessed to their crimes while under narco analysis. The CBI had even seized suspicious items from them, like a bloody kukri from Krishna and a t-shirt with faint bloodstains on it from Rajkumar. The only problem was that narco tests aren't admissible in court, meaning the three couldn't be charged. And the longer the CBI held on to them, the more the public started seeing holes in the CBI's logic. One of the first people to come to the defense of the servants was Krishna's family, who, just a day before he was arrested, gave an interview professing his innocence.
कृष्णा ने कल टीवी पे बोला है, आज तक चैनल पे बोला है कि जो वो उन्हें फ्रेम किया जा रहा है कि इसलिए क्योंकि वो गरीब है, कोई उनके साथ नहीं है। क्या आप इस बात को ठीक मानते हैं? ठीक है मैडम, हम तो गरीब ही है। मैं उसको जीजा हूँ, मैं गरीब हैं हम लोग। हमारे साथ वहाँ बैठ के पढ़ा है, छोटे बचपन से आया वो। तो आप कह रहे हैं कि पूरे टाइम जी पूरे रात हाँ, ऐसे वैसे भी एक बात है कि हमारा बस एक ही रूम है और एक रूम में से ये तो पता नहीं चलेगा कि कोई मतलब बाहर चला जाएगा और 2 घंटे में मतलब वापस भी आ जाएगा, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है।
In the following weeks, facts started to emerge, seemingly proving the innocence of the servants. Apart from the claims by the servants' families that they had been with them all night, Jalvayu Vihar had 6 security guards, none of which had seen anyone come in or out of the Talwar's apartment that night. Not only that, but there wasn't any evidence that the 3 servants had even talked to each other that day. In September of the same year, after failing to charge them with anything, the 3 were released on bail. In September 2009, the investigation was transferred over to a new CBI team in an attempt to further the case, and within a month, they discovered a new lead, bringing the Talwars back into the spotlight. Now, Rajesh Talwar was an amateur golf player, and upon examination of a set of golf clubs, one of them matched the exact dimensions of the injuries on both victims. However, no biological fluid, DNA, or blood was found on any of the golf clubs, In fact, 2 golf clubs in particular seemed to have been thoroughly cleaned, so much so that they were visibly cleaner than the others. This, along with other pieces of evidence, highlighted the parents as suspects again, but with the lack of crucial evidence in the case, the CBI team decided to submit a highly controversial closure report in December 2010, concluding that the case should be closed due to lack of evidence. But before we get into the closure report, it should be mentioned that around this time, Aarushi's Nokia phone that was missing after the murder was eventually found in the possession of a man living in a city around 55 kilometers east of the crime scene. When asked why he had the phone, the man claims that it was found on the ground only 4 kilometers away from the crime scene. The family who had the phone was quickly cleared of all suspicion, but since the phone's memory card was missing, nothing related to the murder could be found. Anyways, back to the closure report. The report had concluded that the 3 servants, Krishna, Rajkumar, and Vijay Mindal, could not have committed the crime due to the fact that the only definitive link between them and the crime was a narco test, which was determined by police to be unreliable. At the time of the murder, all 3 servants also had alibis that were supported by various outside sources. The closure report had also ruled out the involvement of other intruders due to the fact that there was no forced entry into the house and no motive that would justify the involvement of an outside intruder. There was also no reason for an outside intruder to dress up the crime scene or put any effort into hiding Hemraj's body, so this likelihood was crossed out. The only suspects that the closure report could maintain were the Talwars themselves. There were multiple pieces of evidence that supported this claim. The first piece of evidence was the dressing up of the crime scene, including the new and undisturbed bed linens, the white sheet covering Aarushi's body upon the police's arrival, and the cleaning of her body, which could have only been done after the crime. The lack of forced entry into her room also points to the likelihood that whoever carried out the crime had to have ready access to Aarushi's room, with the presence of a key. Also, the cuts on both Hemraj's and Aarushi's neck were done by surgical scalpels and had allegedly been completed by someone who had professional training. Otherwise, the closure report's most notable reasons for suspicion included the Talwar's insistence for police to search for Hemraj, Dr. Rajesh's refusal to provide the key to the terrace that led to Hemraj's body, and Dr. Rajesh's ownership of the golf clubs that possessed the same dimensions as the injuries on both bodies. After the release of this report, public opinion swayed very much against the Talwars, so much so that in late January 2011, while walking to court, a bystander from the crowd struck Rajesh Talwar with a meat cleaver in front of various news cameras.
And people running around and shouting, and I didn't realize actually what had happened. And then we were suddenly told that Rajesh had been attacked.
So, in a series of interviews, the Talwars frantically tried to defend themselves while also attempting to keep the investigation going.
The CBI report saying that they do not have any other suspect beside you.
I have had enough of this. Enough of this I have had. If they do this, this is the second time I'm going through this. This is the kind of investigation, this is the kind of people that we have in our investigation.
How disappointed are you with the CBI? Do you feel totally let down by them and the system?
We feel completely let down by the system. First by the UP police and then finally now by the CBI.
But this proved to be useless, as in 2013, after a 6-month trial, the Talwars were finally found guilty for the 2 murders and were sentenced to life imprisonment. Although, during this time, the media questioned the verdict, confused by how it was reached with only circumstantial evidence. In 2017, for this reason, the Talwars were acquitted of all charges and released. Since then, there hasn't been any major developments in the case. No arrests have been made since then, and the case has somewhat faded into the background. Although, many believe that the Aarushi Hemraj murder case is a prime example of the corruption and incompetence of the Noida, UP, and CBI police, and the verdict that was reached in 2013 was an attempt to cover up their own flawed investigation. As for the public's opinion on the killer, it's still split between the servants and the parents, but with no new information, neither side can prove their beliefs. After 14 years, multiple arrests, and a media frenzy, the Aarushi Talwar case remains unsolved.